minimum tax. And so only people earning above it could potentially get hit by the AMT. That expires also at the end of 2025, and the stronger AMT comes back into force if Congress doesn't do something about it, and will start hitting people again, maybe making maybe 200, 300, 400,000. And so there is a direct trade-off there where, you know, if you want to maintain that AMT relief, the SALT cap is a big part of the math in being able to do that.
So let's talk the numbers a little bit as it comes to the debt and where we're at today, because 2017 and 2025, we're in vastly different places because of obviously a lot of the Biden administration's big government spending agenda that we've seen over the last several years. So this is really interesting by the numbers, folks. We have added $14 trillion in new debt since the passage of TCJA in 2017. Debt is now at 101% of GDP compared to 77% of GDP at the time of TCJA. And of course, we all know these horrific stories about the debt cost of the interest on the debt of over $1 trillion now, about roughly larger than the Department of Defense budget and our national military readiness. So shocking debt growth and spending growth in the last several years, especially. How can we maximize now the pro-growth elements of TCJA going forward without adding complications to our debt issues?
Right. So to transition, you know, perfectly smoothly from one issue to the next, a big part of that is maintaining the SALT cap and defending the SALT cap. That is going to be one of the toughest battles we're fighting next year. It's a Republican trifecta. It's going to be a partisan tax bill. All the Democrats are going to vote no. A small number of Republicans from places like New York and California will have a lot of leverage, saying, if you want my vote to pass the bill, I want this. You get rid of the SALT cap or raise it substantially. The SALT cap is worth about more than $1 trillion over 10 years. And so, you know, that gets expensive really quickly, and it gets expensive on something that is not pro-growth, or at least it's pro-growth for state budgets and government at the state level, but not pro-growth for the private economy. And that's a lot of resources that kind of get taken away from that goal, which is sort of, you know, at my organization, Arnold Ventures, we have this kind of bumper sticker slogan: do both. It's do pro-growth tax reform and be fiscally responsible and try to reduce the deficit, right? We want to try to do both. And to thread that needle, which admittedly is very difficult to thread, we've got to defend the SALT cap, maybe even expand it. I mean, we've talked about expanding it to corporations and capping corporate SALT, which, by the way, we're trying to get people to refer to as sea salt for short. Applause.
Somebody got
like, all right.
That's President Masterson right there.
That was my applause line. Yeah. So, you know, we can not only play defense on the SALT cap, we can also play offense and expand it some and raise some more revenue. But yes, I think we have to go through the provisions that are at stake here, plus other tax provisions. It's not just the ones that are expiring, and we have to say which tax cuts are truly pro-growth, grow the economy, create jobs, result in more entrepreneurship, more innovation, and, you know, and give you that bang for the buck, right? Maybe they increase the deficit, but the bang for the buck is really strong. And which ones don't? Which ones don't really get you that? And we have to prioritize, and then we have to look at ways to pay for it, both spending cuts and base broadening, going after tax loopholes, you know, a combination of the two, and say, where is their waste? Where is their wasteful spending? Where is their tax loopholes that are just helping people get windfalls and not really contributing to the economy? And it's a methodical process of going through everything and prioritizing so that you keep the pro-growth portions, you get rid of other stuff that's just providing people windfalls, and you have a fiscally responsible pro-growth product.
Well, that's a great point. I want to get your thoughts on DOGE here in just a minute, because tomorrow we're going to be joined by Vivek Ramaswamy and Senator Ernst from Iowa, and just a great discussion on DOGE, and I want to get your thoughts there. But one of the other big differences that you all live every single day as ALEC members across the states is 49 of the 50 states have a balanced budget amendment in your state constitution or state law. Now, some aren't worth the ink in the paper that they're used to be printed on, like California and Illinois. But that being said, at least you have to go through the motions. Now, talk about the difference a little bit in Washington, where we don't have a balanced budget amendment yet, although by a show of hands here, who would like to see a federal balanced budget amendment in Washington, D.C.? All right, unanimous support, I think, of the ALEC audience here. But given that difference, since Congress doesn't have to follow that, how can Congress go and have an honest accounting around inflation and around what spending growth means for this going forward? Thank you.
Wow, it just got quiet really quickly. I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
So when we're looking at the honest accounting question, this is something that we believe very strongly in. Taxes and spending are two sides of the fiscal coin, the same fiscal coin at ALEC. That's why we're seeing so many states be successful at cutting taxes, because they're keeping a lid on spending. But without a balanced budget requirement yet here in Washington, although we have unanimous support today from ALEC to get there, what does that look like in terms of an honest accounting around inflation and spending to make sure we can keep balancing the spending and tax question for TCJA?
And by the way, I'm old enough to remember when the balanced budget amendment passed the House with 2/3 and then only got 66 in the Senate and fell one vote short back in the 90s. I mean, it was one senator away from having gone to the states to be ratified, where I'm guessing we would have gotten 3/4 of the states to do it.
Well, we had Speaker Gingrich here this morning, and of course, the key part of the contract with America, when Lisa Nelson, our CEO, and Newt were doing that. So good point.
That's what I'm referring to. I think there was a certain Republican senator from Rhode Island who wouldn't do it, and that's what happened. But I remember that vote. So, honest accounting in Congress? What? Yeah, I think, this is I know this has always been a big debate within the group of sort of limited government, small government advocates. I've always viewed the size of government to be defined more by the level of spending than the level of taxes, right? If it's taxes plus borrowing equals spending, and borrowing just represents future taxes if you're not willing to do anything about spending. And so, if we are talking about whether taxes are higher or lower, it's a really important debate. But if spending isn't changing above the tax level, then there is, that discussion really only has limited effect, because government is still big, and we're just going to borrow money. We're going to borrow the difference, and that's going to end up being future taxes if we're not willing to do anything. So, we obviously don't have a balanced budget at the federal level. I think we have to figure out, again, how to extend the TCJA provisions and extend pro-growth tax policy. My personal preference, if I was dictator, would be on a deficit neutral basis, and we can fill some of the hole with more base broadening, like take SALT to zero, for example. But we need to do some on the spending side. We need to do what DOGE is supposed to do, and go look for improper payments, look for wasteful spending. There is a lot of it. The truth is, there's a lot of it. Some of it's easy to get at, not politically, but easy to write a rule to get at it. Some of it's really hard, right? Some of it's the result of antiquated IT systems at government agencies, and checks going out the door, and they don't have a way to verify whether it's going to the right person or whether the amount is the right amount. I'm very hopeful that this new effort will really help shine a light on a lot of this stuff. We at my organization, we work on these issues. It is not the glamorous stuff to work on, trying to figure out whether we can use AI to identify ineligible people or, things like that. It's not the sexy stuff, right? But that's what we work on, and we roll up our sleeves. And, I think we're hopeful that this new organization will be a partner, or that we can partner with them to support their work. And not just be kind of doing it on our own like we have been doing. And I think like everybody, I've been through many presidential transitions, and there's always that period of, it's not chaos, but it's sort of disorganization, right? And that's just kind of how the system works. Like, nobody's really figured out who to talk to or who's in charge of what yet. And we're kind of working through the best way to engage with this new organization as it gets stood up, because we think the work we do can be really helpful to them, and vice versa. I think getting as they get going, getting direction from them on how we can use our resources to help supplement their work to really improve the federal budget, get at wasteful spending, have more transparency, better accounting, and see what's really going on, is has great potential. As we know in DC, there's been a lot of things over the years that had great potential and then kind of didn't go anywhere, right? Our hope is that we can help, and I think everybody here, who cares about these issues, help make this not like all those other times that kind of just, we ended up doing a white paper and it went into a filing cabinet somewhere and we ran into a bureaucracy that was very resistant and we just gave up, right? Like how do we make this dynamic this time different? I think is going to be our focus and what we all have to figure out how to help these folks do.
So a couple of final questions here as it comes to the tactics of, how do we get this moving? We heard from the great ALEC alumnus speaker Mike Johnson the other night at the U.S. Capitol with our first-time attendee, new legislators and our board, and just an incredible principle-based leadership that we see, coming from him. But, so many new members here in Washington, a lot of great new ALEC alumni members coming from the state level. They need to staff up, they need to get their committee assignments, and I know they want to move quickly, but how fast is actual feasible to get something moving on TCJ?
There's a lot, everybody's got ideas right now, right? And I know some people want to move really fast and they have really good reasons why they want to move really fast. Some people think that a better product will result from a more deliberative, thoughtful process that could take several months. You can see the pros and cons of both approaches. It might be that trying to move really fast is hard because the votes you need have been nominated, for the administration, and the vacancies in the House haven't been filled yet, right? I mean, officially, we're supposed to be at 220 to 215 in the House, but we're really at like 217 to 215 right now, which literally means if everybody votes, you can't lose one Republican. You have to get unanimity, which doesn't ever happen, or at least hasn't happened in the past. So, my view is, look, if there's an opportunity to move quickly, great, move quickly. It's not a terrible thing to take some time, maybe get a couple of vacancies filled, but also spend time talking to the rank and file members. There's a lot of new members who haven't even unpacked their boxes and hired staff yet, right? Much less focused on the interaction between the AMT and the SALT cap. I mean, that's down the road. And
everybody else doesn't talk about this at the kitchen table like we do, George?
I encourage them to.
Yeah, they need to.
But I try to be realistic about it. So, I can see it. I mean, you've got to pass a budget resolution, right? The House has to pass a budget resolution. The Senate does. They have to agree on a budget resolution. Then the committees have to take the reconciliation instructions from that budget resolution, and they have to write their bills, and they have to get scores. And, this is always how it works. CBO and JCT come back, and the scores are not what you hoped. And you got to go back and rewrite stuff and get new scores. So, I think that I understand the reason for moving fast, but I think it's not the end of the world if it takes, frankly, most of the year, because I think it can actually lead to a more thoughtful, more refined process and product. I will say that in 2017, we tried to move fast on Obamacare repeal and do tax second, and Obamacare repeal went down in flames because people just weren't ready to tackle all of that. The TCJA, I think, happened because we took some time. We took some time to get on the same page, House, Senate, White House, Treasury. We took some time to educate the rank and file members, and things were more organized, more deliberative, and more thoughtful, not just thrown together really quickly. And it led to number one, success. Number two, a more quality product in the TCJA.
So final question here. You've got hundreds of ALEC state legislators in the audience and watching, streaming on alec.org right now. What should they be doing as state legislators to continue to raise that important voice, just like we did in 2017 and what we're up to this year with our letter to Congress?
Yeah, great question. And I think, the answer is, look, obviously the members here in DC listen to their community leaders, back home, including their state legislators and others. And you have influence back in the districts in the states with those members. And they need to hear from you on federal policy. They need to hear about how important the SALT cap is from a fairness perspective, from a deficit perspective, as far as like being able to make more room for pro-growth policies. They need to hear that the debt is really important, and we can't just keep increasing spending and cutting taxes at the same time. That road is going to end at some point. And when it does, I worry that it won't be a slow, gradual thing, but it'll be a crash. And so they need to hear from that. They need the support, right? They need to know that people back home have their backs when others in D.C., lobbyists, whoever, are pressuring them to just do this for us. This tax credit's really important to us. This deduction is really important to us. This appropriation is really important to us. This spending program is really important to us. They need to know that there's that counter pressure of people back home saying, do the right thing for the economy, the country, the deficit, because that does matter, and that does sort of give them the courage to make the tough choices.
Well, there you have it. One of the most important issues facing our nation, our economy, and certainly our taxpayer wallets out there across the country. George, thank you for your leadership and being with us today.
Thanks, everyone.
Enjoy lunch, everyone.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome ALEC National Chairman, Kansas Senate President, Ty Masterson.
All right, I hope you guys are all having a good time and finding the value that I found in ALEC. You can continue to eat. If you don't know how to whisper, I might ask you to not talk. Our next guest, 'cause it does get overwhelming, but I do want you to have a good time. No one has a better grasp when it comes to what America thinks than Scott Rasmussen. Not only because he understands what the answers mean, but because he understands how the questions should be asked. His latest innovations, including groundbreaking counter-polling and surround sound messaging, amplify the voice of voters in a way unlike any other. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage, Scott Rasmussen.
Well, thank you. It's always great to be at ALEC. I've been hanging around here long enough that I feel like I'm seeing old friends every time we come out here. And one of the things that I know that we all share is our lives revolve around an election cycle. Whether we want to admit it or not, about September of every year, we begin to think about, I just have to hang on till Election Day. If I can get to November 5th, I can sleep again. And most years that works out pretty well. The election comes. In my world, pollsters are still, we have to talk a little bit about what happened. Some of you may have to worry about new committee assignments or leadership elections, but for the most part, it's a little less stressful. This year is different. And the reason it's different is because of what happened on November 5th. In this city, on November 4th, they believe that the election of 2016, the election of Donald Trump, was a fluke. What they learned on November 5th was actually it was the election of Joe Biden that was the fluke. And in this city, they are really afraid of coming to grips with what it means that Donald Trump was elected twice. And on top of that, they're nervous because there's a Republican Senate and a Republican House. And by the way, 55% of all state legislators in America are Republicans. So lots of good things. And the bottom line for this organization is that more than at any other time in my life, we have the power to reshape America's future by empowering states. That's what this is about. Donald Trump is shaking things up. He's the bull in a china shop. His administration will try to give some power back to the states, but I would encourage all of you not to wait. I would encourage all of you to think of what can you do in your state to reassert a little bit of your authority, your sovereignty, to take a little bit of power back. And more than likely, the administration will be supportive, but take the initiative and get started. Now, I say this because it was a day people were celebrating on the conservative side of America. I think we have to be very realistic about just what happened and where we are today. The good news is that there is a Republican trifecta. Things have been shaken up. There will be a new approach. But there is not, at this point in time, a mandate or a realignment or a completed reshuffling of America. There is the opportunity to do that. The opportunity exists right now to bring about a lasting change. In fact, some of the early signs are pretty encouraging. Donald Trump, in his role as president-elect, has a 52% approval rating. He was never that high at any point in his first term in office. People are willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. His trade policy, most voters recognize that tariffs are bad for the economy. And yet a majority of voters support the president-elect's plan to threaten tariffs on China and on Canada and Mexico to get help in solving the border crisis. People, they understand what is going on, and 54% agree with his approach. That's good news. The fact that so many Hispanic voters voted for Republican Donald Trump, big game changer. In the Black community, and this is maybe a revealing indicator of what's really going on, among Black voters with a college degree, only 5% voted for Donald Trump. Among Black voters without a college degree, 19% voted for the president-elect. Now that is the same breakdown we're seeing across the country as we're seeing this working class realignment begin to take shape and beginning to see what is there. The only thing that's needed to complete it is for this administration to succeed. And that's a tall order. Voters are looking for three things. They want the economy to work for all Americans. They want the border secured, and they want common sense on gender identity issues. If the Trump administration can make progress on those, what will probably happen is there will be a Republican era, a conservative era, where control of the House, the Senate, and the White House is generally expected to be with the GOP. Now that's great. That's all the good news, and that's the opportunity we have to work for. But there's also huge risks. And what I'm about to say, I do not mean to be discouraging or diminishing what happened on November 5th. But we have to be realistic. Donald Trump won the popular vote. That's great. He did not win a majority of the popular vote. His vote total was just under 50%, which means a majority of Americans voted for somebody else. This was the 6th election in a row and the 9th in the last 10 where control of at least one arm of government changed hands. If the next 2 years do not work out well, 2026 will be the 7th. And if that happens, and this is the downside scenario, the Democrats will control the Senate and the House for the last 2 years of President Trump's term. Change elections have become the norm because neither side has really delivered in a way that voters are happy with. We've had 10 elections in a row where nobody got more than 53% of the popular vote. The last time a president won an election with a double-digit majority was 1984. And as I look around the room, a lot of you weren't even around in 1984. But if you weren't, it was so significant that Ronald Reagan won 49 states. We need a landslide like that, and the only way you can get there is by working the next couple of years to achieve those goals. People are not looking for a specific policy solution. Yeah, they instinctively like the tax cuts. They instinctively like a lot of policy ideas. They just want things to work. We talk about different things. We talked earlier today, we heard about efforts to cut government spending. Well, by a 2-to-1 margin, voters say it is more important to secure the border than to cut spending. What they want is an economy that works and a secure border. That has to be the focus. And I would argue that the way to get there is going to be through a little bit of education. Now, when we start thinking in these terms and we begin to think about what does success look like, it is really basic. People need hope. They need hope that the future is going to be a little bit better. They're already seeing a little bit of it. Since November 5th, we have seen a modest increase in economic optimism. There is a belief that somehow things will get better with this new team in power. And if that belief is realized, and by the way, very specifically in the way people feel about their own personal finances, there will be a lasting change. But again, that risk is very real. I want to put, the work that you must do. On the one hand, you want to be supportive. You want to work in concert to make sure things are getting better in your states. You want to be reaching out to grasp some more power from the states away from official Washington. All that's great. But I want to put the story in the context of where we are as a nation. Our firm has done work recently on a group we call the Elite 1%. The first surveys we did on this were done in cooperation with Steve Moore's group, the Committee to Unleash Prosperity. We did additional surveys with our new institute, the Napolitan Institute. This Elite 1% are people who have a postgraduate degree. And by the way, just simple point, you hear a lot about the diploma divide. That's misleading. The real gap is between people with a postgraduate degree and the rest of America. people who have just a bachelor's degree have views that are closer to those without a college degree than they do to the postgrads. So our elite 1% are people with a postgraduate degree. They live in a densely populated urban area like Washington, D.C. or Manhattan, and they make a lot of money. Their views are wildly out of touch with the American people. Let me give you a couple of examples, just in case you don't believe me. There's a politically active segment of this elite 1%. These are people who talk politics every day. And in that world, and this is the world that sets the political and media narrative for our nation today, 69% of them believe the rest of us have too much freedom. A majority of them believe that parents have too much control over the education of their children. 3/4 of them want to ban private ownership of guns. And what makes it even worse is they believe most Americans agree with them on these issues. A majority of them think the federal government should have the power to censor social media posts. And by the way, half of them think you should not be allowed to vote unless you have a college degree. I could go on, but you get the picture. When I look at that, I think what we're seeing is a group that has rejected America's founding ideals. And that's the fight we're in today. We are in a fight for the soul of our country. America was founded on the ideals of freedom, equality, self-governance. The American people, and by the way, most Kamala Harris supporters, most Democrats, most Republicans still embrace those ideals. The group that opposes them are the elites. And to give you a sense of just how that plays out, why it is creating such a horrible moment in our political system, why our political system is so toxic today, I'm going to share one of my favorite stories about the greatest football game ever played. And if there's any New England Patriots fans in the audience, I want to apologize in advance. But about 15 years ago, Bill Belichick and Tom Brady and the Patriots came into the Super Bowl 18-0, and all they had to do was beat the New York Giants, who barely made the playoffs, and they would be the only 19-0 perfect season in the history of the sport. Full disclosure, I brought my kids up and told them there's only two teams in football. There's the New York Giants and the bad guys. So we were clearly had a rooting interest in this. And despite the fact that the Giants rarely play football anymore, my kids are still Giants fans. But on that day, it looked like the Patriots were going to win, but it was closer than expected. 2.5 minutes to go. The Patriots were ahead. The Giants had a fourth down. Somehow they converted on fourth down. Then there was a miraculous helmet catch. And then, and I can still see it, Plaxico Burress was wide open in the end zone. I couldn't believe it. The Giants were ahead and were going to win the Super Bowl and end the perfect season. What hardly anybody talks about is that at the end of that game, Bill Belichick actually didn't even wait. He left the field before the game ended. He did not come to midfield the way every coach does after every game and congratulate the winning coach. It's probably the only time in his career he didn't do that. I don't know Belichick, but my understanding, my guess is he was so close to the impossible dream, so close to that perfection that it just broke him. He couldn't deal with it. Now, in today's world, we have an elite 1% who are in a little bit of the same position as Bill Belichick. Back in 1887, future president and the worst president in American history, Woodrow Wilson, wrote an article about the administrative state. And he dreamed of a government where we would send people to special schools to train them to be civil servants, and then we would install them in government positions and insulate them from voters. He wanted them to be able to make decisions that were rational and made by experts, and didn't really matter what the voters thought. By the way, we did a survey of government managers recently, and we did ask them, suppose you thought a regulation was needed and you knew that voters overwhelmingly opposed it. What would you do? None of you will be surprised to know that most of them said we'd ignore the voters and impose the regulation. That was Woodrow Wilson's dream. Well, for 150 years, that regulatory state, that administrative state has been growing. Sometimes 2 steps forward, 1 step back, sometimes growth during the New Deal. In the last 50 years, it has taken off. There are 5 times as many government regulators today as there were in the mid-1970s. I believe that the people who are pushing this idea, this elite group who have those views that they don't really like America's founding ideals, I think they thought we had finally won. Finally, the American people are letting us rule without the messiness of having to listen to voters. And they probably thought we should be thanking them, because obviously they know better how we should live our lives than we do ourselves. And instead, voters elected Donald Trump. Instead, voters began to push back at every level. Rather than thanking these elites for their leadership, they rejected it. I spoke at Harvard during the Tea Party era, and one of the professors there, perfect embodiment of what's going on, said, what I don't understand is why don't the American people just let us lead? It's what we were trained to do. Now, think about the arrogance of that statement. How were you elected to play a leadership role? You were elected by people. You weren't appointed to Harvard's faculty. But that was the attitude that we've been up against. And I think what we need to be focused on is, how do you break through that? How do you break through it at the state level? How do you break through it at the federal level? How do you make sure that as much as possible, the decisions about the future of America are made close to home? Wherever possible, made by families or local communities. When you need some larger involvement, made by a state government rather than the federal government. All of this goes to the idea of empowering people, and the first step in that is to move power from the federal government back to the states. When I look at this, when I see this in this larger sense, these next 4 years are our chance to save America. It is a fight for the soul of the nation. It is a fight to determine whether or not those founding ideals of freedom and equality and self-governance can survive. Can our nation continue to lead the world and be the shining city on a hill that Ronald Reagan talked about? I think the answer is yes. I am very optimistic. And I'm optimistic not just because of what happened on November 5th. I'm optimistic because I look at more polling data about what the American people believe than just about anybody on the planet. And I know that the people continue to embrace those ideals. They are frustrated with leadership that doesn't. So our task together is to stand up and make sure we fight for those ideals, pass them on to another generation, make sure that our children and grandchildren have the opportunity to enjoy those blessings of liberty, make sure that the system works in a way that puts the people in charge. And if together we can do that, we'll have done our part to give our nation a new blessing of liberty, and to make sure that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from this earth. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back ALEC National Chairman, Kansas Senate President, Ty Masterson.
Well, for me, that kind of put the exclamation point on Speaker Gingrich's message this morning, right? That we have a time that we've elected Trump. We have an opportunity, and we need to take it. And we are the laboratories that have to take that. So thank you, Scott, for doing that. So for the record, all I'm going to do right now is kind of the who's line it anyway stuff of like read the credits on the way out. So this is all PSA. Thank you all for being here. So at 1:45, you got ACE meeting in the Latrobe room. The Civil Justice Task Force is in Lafayette Park room. All this all 1:45. The Communications Technology Task Force, Constitution C, Education and Workforce Development, and Constitution A, Health and Human Services, and Constitution B, Federalism and International Relations, and Independence Room B. And at 2:45, we'll have social media training in the Burnham room. And I think for looks like everything after that, consult your app or look at your hard copy, because that's it. Thank you all for being here today and enjoying the afternoon.